On the 26th of May 2018, Aston Villa lost a football match at Wembley. That's the whole disaster. They lost one game, 1-0, to Fulham in the Championship playoff final. 6 weeks later, the club couldn't pay a £4 million tax bill. His Majesty's Revenue and Customs filed a petition to wind them up, and Aston Villa Football Club, founder members of the Football League, European champions of 1982, were being openly discussed in the press as a candidate for administration. £4 million. To put that in perspective, they'd spent more than that on individual players who never got in the team. And I know how that sounds. It sounds like sloppiness, like somebody forgot to pay an invoice. It wasn't. That £4 million was the visible tip of something much larger, and the reason it couldn't be paid comes down entirely to what happened at Wembley on the 26th of May. Because that match was worth somewhere in the region of £160 million. Win it, you're in the Premier League and the television money lands. Lose it, and you're in the Championship for another year with a Premier League wage bill and nothing coming in to cover it. Villa had built everything on winning that game. Everything. And they lost it in the 57th minute to a Tom Cairney goal. This is a story about what happens when a club decides that promotion isn't a hope, it's a plan. You need to understand what Aston Villa actually are, because if you're under 30 you've mostly seen them as a mid-table Premier League side, and that undersells it enormously. Villa were founded in 1874 by members of a Wesleyan Chapel cricket team in Aston who wanted something to do in the winter. That's the actual origin. A cricket club got bored. And then 14 years later, a Villa man invented professional football as an organised sport. This is a genuinely undertold thing. In the 1880s, clubs played friendlies and cup ties, and fixtures collapsed constantly because a team would simply not turn up if they got a better offer. There was no league anywhere in any sport in this country. William McGregor, a Scottish draper who was a director at Aston Villa, wrote to a handful of other clubs in March 1888, proposing that a group of them commit to playing each other home and away on fixed dates every season. That letter is the Football League. 12 clubs joined. Villa were one of them, and McGregor became the first chairman. Every league in world football, every table you have ever looked at, descends from a suggestion made by a director of Aston Villa. Then they went and won the thing, repeatedly. 5 league titles before 1900, and the double in 1897, in a season where they were, by any reasonable measure, the best football team on the planet. 7 league titles in total, 7 FA Cups. Subscribe if you're not already. This is a club that invented the league, and then, in 2018, couldn't pay a £4 million tax bill, and I want you here for how that happened. And then, more than 80 years later, they did something nobody saw coming at all. In 1982, Aston Villa won the European Cup. Even now that sentence looks like a typo. They'd won the league the season before with a squad assembled for almost nothing, using 14 players across the entire campaign, which is a statistic that would get a modern manager sectioned. Then they went into Europe and kept not losing, and halfway through it, the manager who'd built the whole thing walked out. Ron Saunders resigned in February over a contract dispute with Villa in the quarter-finals of the European Cup. His assistant, Tony Barton, a man almost nobody outside the club had heard of, took the job and won the competition 4 months later. The final was in Rotterdam against Bayern Munich. Villa's goalkeeper went off injured after 8 minutes and was replaced by a 23-year-old reserve, Nigel Spink, who had played one first-team game in his life. He then produced the performance of his career for 82 minutes. Peter With scored the only goal off the post from about 4 yards, which he has cheerfully admitted was a scruff. Champions of Europe, a club from Birmingham with a caretaker manager and a reserve goalkeeper. Villa Park holds 42,000. It has held a full house for 100 years, through relegations, through the wilderness, through everything. It has hosted more FA Cup semi-finals than any ground in England, which is a strange and rather lovely distinction, because it means several generations of supporters of other clubs have had the best day of their lives there. That's the club we're talking about. Not a big club by modern spending, a big club by every other measure there is. And here's the fact that frames the rest of this. Aston Villa spent 29 consecutive seasons in the top flight of English football. 29. They were there before the Premier League existed, and they were founder members of that too in 1992. An entire generation grew up without ever seeing Villa outside the top division. Then in 2016 they went down. The relegation itself was grim in a way that's hard to convey to anybody who didn't watch it. Villa won 3 league games all season, 3 out of 38. They were bottom by Christmas and mathematically down in April with weeks to spare. They got through 3 managers. Tim Sherwood went in October. Rémi Garde, a well-regarded French coach, arrived in November and was gone by March, having won 2 games. Eric Black finished the season as caretaker, and the football wasn't even the worst part. There were reports of players falling out with each other in training. There was a squad that had cost a great deal of money and visibly did not want to be there. Villa Park, 42,000 seats and the 3rd oldest ground in the Premier League, spent the back half of that season as a genuinely miserable place to be. Randy Lerner, the American owner who'd been trying to sell for years by that point and had visibly disengaged from the club, finally found a buyer that summer. The buyer was Tony Xia, a Chinese businessman whose company took control in June 2016. Xia was, and I mean this fairly neutrally, an unusual owner. He was extremely active on Twitter, replying to supporters directly, promising things, joking around. For a while the fan base loved it, because after years of Lerner seeing nothing at all here, was somebody who seemed to actually want to be there. He talked about Champions League football. He talked about a global brand. None of that was a crime, and plenty of owners talk like that. But it set a level of expectation that made anything short of immediate promotion feel like failure, and it meant that when things started going wrong, the noise around the club was already at full volume. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, and where you should recognise the shape from other things on this channel. Getting out of the Championship is one of the hardest things in world football, and it is brutally expensive. 3 go up out of 24, 2 automatically, 1 through a playoff lottery. And sitting in that division are half a dozen clubs every single year who used to be in the Premier League, still have Premier League contracts on the books, and are burning money at a rate the division cannot possibly support. The Championship, collectively, loses staggering amounts of money every season. Clubs routinely spend more on wages than they generate in total revenue. Not more than profit, more than revenue. Read that again if it didn't land. There have been seasons where the average Championship club paid out more in wages alone than it took in from tickets, television, sponsorship, merchandise, and everything else combined. Before you get to transfer fees, agents, the stadium, the staff, the buses, the training ground. No other industry on earth operates like that. If a chain of restaurants spent 110% of its turnover on chefs, it would be shut by Christmas, and the people who ran it would never work again. In the Championship, it's Tuesday. Subscribe if you haven't. The bit where a European Cup winning club gets a winding up petition from the taxman is coming, and I promise it's worse than it sounds. They do it because the prize is so large that it distorts everything. Promotion is worth well over £100 million across a few seasons, even if you go straight back down, because of the parachute payments. So the logic every club in that division ends up following is the same. Spend whatever it takes, because if it works, the money covers it, and if it doesn't work, you'll deal with that later. Leeds United did a version of this in 2001, and I've covered what it cost them. Portsmouth did a version of it. Villa did it too, just aimed 1 division lower. The first season under Xia, 2016 to 2017, didn't work. 13th, so they went harder. The second season they brought in Steve Bruce, a manager with a genuine record of getting clubs out of that division, and they assembled a squad that had absolutely no business being in the Championship. John Terry, who'd captained Chelsea in England, Robert Snodgrass, Ahmed El Mohammadi, Glenn Whelan, Jack Grealish, who was theirs already and would go on to be sold for £100 million. Think about John Terry for a moment, because he tells you everything. A man who had captained Chelsea to 5 league titles and the Champions League, and captained England, choosing to spend a season in the second tier of English football. He didn't do that for the standard of football. He did it because Villa were paying, and because everybody involved assumed it was a 1-year job that ended in promotion. That squad cost a fortune to run. The accounts for that period showed losses that were enormous even by Championship standards, and the wage bill was reported as being far above what the club was actually bringing in. The rules that were supposed to prevent this, the division's financial fair play regulations, were something Villa were openly at risk of breaching, and the club was reported to be selling players, partly to stay the right side of them, none of which mattered if they went up. That's the thing to hold on to. Every single one of those decisions is defensible if they win 1 more game, and they nearly did. Villa finished 4th. They went into the playoffs and beat Middlesbrough over 2 legs, 1-0 on aggregate, a nervous, horrible tie of the kind that division specialises in. And on the 26th of May 2018, they walked out at Wembley in front of about 85,000 people with one game standing between them and everything they'd spent 2 years betting on. Fulham won it 1-0. Tom Cairney, 57th minute, a low finish after a move that started with a Villa mistake. And that was it. Not a bad season. Not a near miss to build on. A financial cliff arrived at by a single goal in a single game. Right, quick one. If you're enjoying this, subscribing costs you nothing, and it's the only reason I can keep making these. Do that now, and let's get to the part where the taxman turns up. What happened in the 6 weeks after that final is the clearest illustration you'll ever get of what borrowing against a football result actually means in practice. The money didn't come, so Villa had to find it somewhere else, immediately, because the wage bill didn't stop on the 26th of May. Players who'd been signed on the assumption of Premier League football were still under contract on Premier League money in a division that couldn't pay for it. There was an urgent scramble to sell, in a market where every other club knew exactly what had happened at Wembley, and exactly how badly Villa needed the money, which is the worst possible position to be selling from, and everybody in the building knew it. Then in June, a £4 million payment to HMRC went unpaid, and it's worth being clear about what that payment was, because a tax bill makes it sound like a demand that arrived unexpectedly. It wasn't. This is money that had already been deducted from employees' wages, and was being held on their behalf until the due date. It isn't the club's money at any point. It's money the club is looking after. When a business can't hand that over, it isn't a dispute about how much is owed. It's a straightforward statement that the cash isn't there. So HMRC did what HMRC always does, which is file a petition to have the company wound up. I've said this before on this channel, and it applies every single time. The taxman is the one creditor who has no sentiment about football, no interest in your history, and no reason to wait. Rangers found that out. Portsmouth found that out. Bury found that out. The reporting that summer was blunt. Administration was described as a real possibility. The club would have faced a points deduction going into the following season, which for a club already hemorrhaging money would have meant a relegation fight in the third tier of English football, with a squad containing a former England captain. Steve Bruce said afterwards that the club had come within a fortnight of going under. Whether it was exactly a fortnight, nobody outside the boardroom can say for certain. But nobody involved has ever disputed the general picture, which is that it was close. And I want to spell out what close actually meant, because administration is a word people hear a lot without picturing it. An insolvency practitioner takes over the running of the club, not advises, runs. His legal duty is to the creditors, not to you, not to the supporters, and not to whether there's a team on the pitch in August. He decides who gets paid. He decides which players get sold and for how much, and every buyer in the country knows he has to sell, so nobody pays full price for anything. Then the points deduction, 12, under the rules that applied. Villa would have started the following season on -12, in a division they were already too expensive for, with the best players gone and no money to replace them. Relegation to League One was not a doomsday scenario, it was the reasonable expectation. And a championship club in League One with Premier League contracts still on the books is precisely the position Portsmouth were in when they went into administration a second time. That's not me reaching for a parallel. That is the same set of circumstances, and it took Portsmouth 9 years to get back. That's what a fortnight away means. And then in July 2018, Nassif Sawiris and West Edens took majority control. Shah stepped back and later left entirely. The tax bill got paid, the petition was dismissed, and Aston Villa carried on existing. Tell me in the comments which club you want doing next. Genuinely, most of the videos on this channel started as somebody's comment on another one. The following year, Villa went up, playoffs again, same competition, same stadium, and this time they won it. Beat Derby County at Wembley, which is a fixture worth remembering, because Derby went into administration themselves 3 years later, and came about as close to liquidation as an English club has ever come. 2 clubs at Wembley playing for £160 million, and within 4 years both of them had stared at the end of their own existence. One that day, one later. Since then, Villa have stayed in the Premier League, finished 4th, and played in the Champions League for the first time since they won the thing in 1982. And Jack Grealish, the local lad who'd come through the academy and stayed through the relegation and the championship years, and the summer nobody could pay the tax bill, was eventually sold to Manchester City for £100 million, which is a fee that would have solved the entire crisis 25 times over, and which only existed because somebody found the money to keep the club alive long enough for him to become worth it. That's worth sitting with. The single asset that eventually made Villa solvent was a 19-year-old who was already at the club in 2016, playing in a team that won 3 games all season. Nobody planned that. Nobody could have. It was luck arriving late, on top of the earlier luck of 2 billionaires turning up in July 2018, which means the whole episode has been more or less forgotten. And that's exactly why I wanted to do it. Because look at what actually nearly killed Aston Villa. Not corruption, not incompetence particularly, not a bad owner emptying the tills. What nearly killed them was a completely reasonable business plan that had one flaw, and the flaw was that it contained no version of losing. They needed to go up, not hope to, needed to financially in a specific window or the arithmetic stopped working. And going up in that division is decided by things nobody controls. A playoff semi-final, a referee, a goal in the 57th minute at Wembley. That's the same sentence I keep ending up at. Leeds needed to keep finishing in the top 3. Portsmouth needed one man to keep signing checks. Liverpool needed to qualify for the Champions League every single year. Rangers needed the winning to keep funding the schemes. Villa needed to win one game of football. And here's the thing that I think makes this the most useful story of the lot. Villa's plan was more sensible than any of theirs. They weren't chasing the European Cup or building an empire. They were trying to get out of the Championship, which is what every club in the Championship is trying to do, using the method every club in the Championship uses. That's not an outlier. That's the standard operating model of an entire division of English football, and it means a substantial number of clubs are right now one bad afternoon away from where Villa were in June 2018. Most of them don't have a Cyrus waiting in the wings. Villa got rescued. It's worth saying plainly that they were extremely lucky, and that luck arrived in the form of 2 men with more money than the problem. The 42,000 people who fill Villa Park had no say in any of it, no vote, no warning, and mostly no idea. They found out from the newspapers, like everybody else. Subscribe, there's a new collapse on this channel every week. The next one's on screen now, go and watch it.